Welcome everyone to our session this afternoon, going for about an hour and a half on energy procurement and load flexing or load shifting. My name is Jared Leake and I'm the CEO of the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity. And I'd like to welcome you. This is the first of our two webinars looking at energy procurement, load and load flexing today. And then next week, we'll be looking at facility integration and thermal batteries. May I start this webinar by acknowledging the traditional owners of where I am living and broadcasting from in the northern suburbs of Sydney, that being the Darramurrugal people. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And then when I say elders, I'm referring to elders like Auntie Edna Watson. She is a Darug elder and a long-time resident of Oakville. And she's an artist and storyteller, and she's made significant contributions to the Darug language and contributing to the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. If you'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which you reside, feel free to do so in the chats just now. And for those of you that are new to A2EP, we are a non-for-profit organisation, and we are funded by members who share our mission to double the energy productivity for Australia. In short, we help businesses pursue a cleaner and more successful future by producing more with less. We explore the world's best practice, we connect stakeholders and members, and we advocate for programs and policy to help increase energy productivity and jobs towards a zero emissions future. In our webinar today, this will be recorded and the recording and the slides will be issued sometime next week. And we're really hoping for a good interactive session. We've certainly allowed some time at the end of each presentation for a couple of questions. So please enter those questions in the Q&A box and we'll endeavour to get to those straight after the presentation, or our speakers will try and answer those after they've had their presentation as well. So I thought I'd just start off with this slide, calling out to all those energy nerds out there like myself. I'm sure there's others out there that are checking this and have been watching Open NEM for some time. My addiction isn't too bad. I just check it once a week or so. But for those of you that are checking, I mean, I'm sure you're noticing the frequency and duration of these negative price events that is occurring. We've all heard about the duck curve for some time. But you know, this really does seem entrenched in our energy system and it's not going away quickly. This does seem to be the new normal for energy, and yeah, there is certainly opportunities this is creating. For those that are the first movers and can move quickly on this and able to take advantage of this, we see there's some really good opportunities for increasing profitability and increasing the usage of, or improving the usage of energy. So to explore this, we have a great lineup today. We're going to be hearing from ARENA, who's going to be telling us about their pilot program. We've got New South Wales government, who's going to be telling us about their programs for peak demand management. And then we're going to move more into those that are doing and performing energy flexibility right now. And so we have Bridgette from Bluescope Steel to be presenting with Lisa Zembrodt from Schneider Electric, along with followed by Louise Walsh, from Ndevr, and Jeremy Sampson from Crown Resorts. So these are people who are living and breathing flexible demand and load shifting, and they're going to give us their experience and advice on how they're doing that. After that, we're going to look about technologies to do and help you do with load flexing, and also some research and development. Myself and Dave Taylor from DETA will talk to you about an abattoir load flexing project, and then we have Hessam and Raymond Little talking about a project that Glacium is doing on phase change materials. So with that, I'd like to jump in for our first speaker today. I couldn't imagine a better way to kick off our topic today than having John Sibley from ARENA join us. John is the Principal Policy Advisor for ARENA, and plenty of runs on the board when it comes to energy positions and climate change, sustainability policy and legislation. John has lots of involvement with different development forums. And John, I know you like working to solve complex organisation and policy challenges. We've got one hell of a one here for you today. If you'd like to start sharing your screen and take away with the presentation there.
Okay, hi everyone. I wasn't actually expecting to share my screen. I can do that quickly now. Just give me a sec.
John, if there's any problems there, I'll be able to bring that up myself anyway.
Okay, I'm just going to find the presentation slides.
Oh, looks like I'm racing it too
then. Okay, apologies for this. I just assumed it would be someone else driving.
Here we go. I've got it ready to go.
All right, thank you. It's great. Well, hi everyone. So it's great to be here. I'm really keen to learn about what's happening on the ground. I'm representing ARENA today, and ARENA is a grant funding agency, as you know, with a bit of a long history of supporting the renewable energy development in Australia. We've recently announced our new investment priorities, which I've got up on the screen here. So our historic focus has been on the electricity transition, and that's is priority 1 listed there. But we've introduced new priorities around commercialising clean hydrogen, supporting the transition to low emissions metals, exploring opportunities to scale up carbon capture and storage, and a range of budget measures. You'll be probably aware that our mandate is derived from our legislation, but we also have an independent board that works within that mandate and establishes priorities on a periodic basis. So if you look at the priority 1, one thing that's really emerged over the last couple of years is the importance of demand side integration in the electricity system. And ARENA has funded a number of projects and trials at various scales, demonstrating how flexible demand can complement renewable energy, and in fact is a critical component of the future electricity system when it becomes characterized by greater and greater shares of variable renewable electricity. If you can skip to the next slide. So I guess the headline issue for us when thinking about our engagement with demand side flexibility is the changing market dynamics that are underway. So variable generation, so principally wind and solar, is as was mentioned, is driving down the prices and demand in the middle of the day. But it's actually resulting in price increases in the evening, and there's various studies that looked at the drivers for this, but it seems to be to do largely with the ramping requirements that are required to go from very low base during the day to the evening peak, and potentially market power issues associated with the limited number of generators that can supply those fast ramping services. Market power is obviously normally transient, and you'd expect that to provide a price signal for batteries and other things to come in and gobble up some of that inframarginal rent, as it's called, which is the profits that people are making at those times. However, batteries, as we know, are still relatively expensive, and they're going to be a high cost resource for some time. So the key benefit of demand side flexibility is being able to provide a lower cost response to those price dynamics. And we've just commissioned some market modelling with Ndevr, who have a sort of a Plexos model and are based on the ISP. And we've undertaken a number of scenarios where we look at potential for demand side participation across, from residential, commercial through industrial and hydrogen. And excluding hydrogen, which is obviously just a huge thing, the results are looking like about $8 billion in net present value terms from enabling what we consider to be a practical level of demand side flexibility. So that saving is really to do with the reduced requirements for battery storage, so the reduced capital costs, and also reduced generator fuel costs, especially gas costs for the peaking generators. Now, in the modelling of this kind, it actually excludes excludes the sort of recovery of capital costs for legacy generators in the system. And when you factor that in and all the sort of, you know, caps and swaps that those generators are using, the actual final cost saving for consumers will be significantly higher than 8 billion. But it becomes very cloudy as to how you actually model that and what kind of assumptions you make about supply elasticity. If that makes sense, happy to go into that more if people would like to. Yeah, but essentially, you know, ARENA as a grant funding agency, you know, sort of funds the projects and the trials that are at the leading edge. And by doing that, we hope to increase the range of mature options that are available for businesses to apply. But we're also engaged in policy engagement, and we have been working with the energy market bodies for some time to, I guess, help catalyse the reforms which can then underpin and provide opportunity for those technical options to be realised. So probably the big one we did was the AEMO ARENA demand response trial under the RERT, which catalysed quite a lot of activity across sectors, about 30,000 households participating in demand response, typically in response to kind of lack of reserve events in the market. And now the new challenge is really about looking at that duck curve and saying, well, how can we shift load into the middle of the day? You'll be aware that, or you may be aware that AEMO's backstop mechanism allows it to curtail solar PV during the middle of the day if there are security issues in the grid. And that's really about preserving space in the market for synchronous generators to provide system strength and inertia. So we are also interested in how the demand side can you know, respond to pricing and provide an alternative to the use of that backstop mechanism in a way which is more, I guess, productive from an economic sense. The ESB has recommended that we work with AEMO to conduct another trial to demonstrate some solutions in this space. That trial will probably be in-market mechanism, sorry, not a separate mechanism, but an in-market set of resources that are funded and established for the goal of responding to pricing dynamics, including those intraday price spreads that are mentioned over on the right there. But also potentially how those resources could be used more directly by AEMO to respond to minimum system load conditions. And there is a relationship between low pricing and minimum system load, but it's not a direct relationship. So price responsive resources can't necessarily be relied on to provide those system security services for AEMO. The Victorian government is currently looking at how it could implement the backstop measure in Victoria, and they're very keen and have been working with us on exploring options for a trial. So I think there's maybe one more slide, or is
that was all I had for
that's it. Yeah. So yeah, probably just to close off on that, I think you know, we're currently looking at providing some funding in this area. We're very keen for people to come forward with proposals. We're considering a competitive round, which might provide a bit of structure for that, and with the goal of enabling resources to be online by spring 2022. Mm-hmm. So yeah, welcome any questions at the appropriate time, or please reach out if I can assist with anything.
Thanks, John. And just one quick question. We'll probably keep moving. I'll get you to answer those questions live in the Q&A box there. I'll probably get a few more through. Any ideas on the quantum that you're looking for of the size of flexing? Is it 1 megawatt to minimum 1 megawatt hour? What sort of load shifting quantity are you looking for there? Or is it just really keeping it open at the moment?
It's quite open at the moment. I don't think in the context of a trial, we're not trying to solve the problem. So we won't be, you know, expecting hundreds of megawatts of capacity. But we do want to demonstrate solutions that have the potential to scale and have the potential to supply those hundreds of megawatts or potentially gigawatts of capacity over time.
Very good. John, many thanks for that. It's great to see ARENA getting involved in this space and putting some dollars in there to support the change. So yeah, thanks for the very quick update. From that, we'll move on to a presentation now from Keith Tarlo, who's a Principal Policy Officer from Department of Planning, Industry and Environment in New South Wales Government. Keith, I'll get you to share your screen as I'll give you a quick introduction and we'll get started there. Keith, you've got extensive experience in leading climate change and energy efficiency initiatives in New South Wales public sector. Lots of time working on establishing the New South Wales Energy Savings Scheme. You've led the development of New South Wales Climate Change Policy Framework, and that's set the ambition for net zero by 2050. And you've co-led development of New South Wales Net Zero Plan Stage 1, and now getting heavily into this, the New South Wales Peak Demand Reduction Scheme. Keith, I'll hand over to you, and yeah, certainly interested to see what New South Wales is doing in supporting these sorts of changes.
Okay, thanks, Jared, and thanks very much to the Australian Alliance for Energy Productivity for your interest in the New South Wales Peak Demand Reduction Scheme. I'll cover today the new energy security safeguard and the peak scheme, which is under that. I'll talk about how market-based certificate schemes work generally, and then go into a bit more detail about the design of the peak scheme, and I will get to which activities we'll be able to create activities and incentives, which I'm sure is what most people here want to know about. So firstly, just catching up with the energy security safeguard. This was announced in 2019, and it was announced that it would bring together the existing two schemes, the existing energy savings scheme and the creation of a new scheme for peak demand reduction. The energy, for those of you that know the energy savings scheme, the targets have now been increased, so they'll increase over the decade to 13% by the end of the decade, and we're in the process now of adding a whole range of new fuel switching activities, including solar water heaters and heat pumps, and some fuel switching to renewable gases and so on. The government is also investing about almost $50 million in two programs to complement all this. There's $25 million to get the safeguard going by streamlining its implementation, supporting expansion and so on. That'll do things like training for measurement verification, piloting new activities to get more activities happening under those schemes. And there's also $22 million for business decarbonisation to help with low-cost improvements and taking practical steps like electrification towards net zero. And that'll help with all sorts of things like metering, strategic planning, technical services. So focusing on the peak scheme, which is as I said, one half of the safeguard. Now, this is going to be the world's first certificate scheme for peak demand reduction. So it's stepping into the unknown here a bit. We did consult on it last year, so thanks to those who did put in a submission on a consultation paper last year. The scheme is now in legislation. It was added to the Electricity Supply Act a few weeks ago, and the Minister announced that. In the legislation, the objective of the scheme is to reduce peak demand, and it does this by providing financial incentives to encourage activities that create capacity for peak demand reduction. Like the energy savings scheme, the peak scheme will also help with all three of the trilemma of affordability, reliability and sustainability, but the scheme does focus primarily on the reliability side. So it targets the physical system peak of annual makes and demand, not the price peaks. This is because a shortfall in firm capacity is most likely to occur at times of peak demand, and that's why peak demand reduction plays such a critical role in improving reliability. It's also going to contribute to affordability because it does help reduce wholesale prices at those peak times, and it reduces the need for network capacity investment, and it will also help with the sustainability of the electricity system by improving load flexibility. In New South Wales, maximum demands continues to be forecast for heat waves in summer for the next decade, so that's what the scheme will focus on for the time being. It doesn't have to forever, but that's for the time being. The scheme will only provide incentives for capacity. So for the dynamic things, which some of this workshop's about, like peak demand response and so on, it will rely on other mechanisms to do the dispatch. For example, it can complement the wholesale demand response mechanism, or a retailer or a distributor who might pay for real-time dispatch. The scheme starting for the 22-23 summer on the 1st November, and because it's a world first, we're starting a little bit modestly with small and simple, and then building up from there to the more complicated things like dynamic peak demand response and so on. So how does this work? So just before I get to the peak scheme, just talk about how market-based certificate schemes generally work. They're a good tool, unlike what ARENA does. They're a good tool to stimulate commercial rollout for technologies that are already at the middle stages of commercialisation. Some other types of government programs and rebates and things, the sort of things ARENA does in particular, are better at the earlier stage, sort of early pre-commercialisation. But these tend to provide more certainty on the technology and the level of subsidy, whereas a certificate scheme is designed to drive competition and trying to reduce costs for a variety of technologies. So for the peak scheme in particular, this diagram will give you an outline. For those familiar with the ESS, it's very similar. The government will set annual certificate targets based on the % of annual maximum demand. That then gets allocated amongst the liable parties, who are mainly retailers, and they have to either buy or create certificates to meet their target, and there's a penalty if they don't. They go to the supply side of the market to get the certificates, and they come from accredited certificate providers who help businesses or households implement things which make available peak demand reduction capacity. That capacity then can be turned into certificates, and the liable parties buy that off the market, and some of the money gets returned to the household or business. Most businesses will use an accredited certificate provider who can aggregate on their behalf. A few large businesses, like with the ESS, can opt to do that themselves. Now, one of the things we've had to sort out with this scheme is what a certificate is. It's not as easy as with energy savings, where it's fairly straightforward. So we've had to translate the concept of a scheme focused on reliability into a certificate. Now, reliability has both a capacity dimension and a time dimension. So for that reason, a certificate will be, or maybe it's clearer here, will be 0.1 kilowatt hour, sorry, already falling into that trap, 0.1 kilowatts of peak demand reduction capacity available for averaged over a 1 hour period. Now, for the creation of certificates, so an accredited certificate provider or a business doing it themselves, calculations, of course, need to take into account that, the capacity and the time, but also when it's available. So it has to be available during that peak period, which we've set down as a particular time, 2:30 to 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, in the 5 months of the AER's definition of summer, and some other things. So we'll take into account firmness. So if you're only operating, 5 days out of 7, it won't be 100% firmness. It'll be 5/7 of that, and a number of other factors. Just quickly touching on targets, because this mainly affects the retailers, of course, but they'll be based on the 1 in 10 year maximum demand, not the average forecast, expressed as a percent, and it ramps up, starting, as I said, small at 0.5 in the first year of 2023, and ramping up to 10% by the end of the decade. Being a market-based scheme, we want different types of activities to compete. That's the point of this type of schemes, and because we want to get the most efficient type of, want to reduce peak demand in the most efficient way. So we've identified broadly 3 types of activity. One is peak demand saving, where we recognise that the peak demand reduction capacity provided by some energy efficiency activities that work really well at peak times, like air conditioning, refrigeration, and so on. Secondly, peak demand response, which is where you control a certain technology to temporarily reduce operating loads at peak times, mainly applicable, but not only applicable in business manufacturing, well, not manufacturing, but larger industries that can shut down for brief periods. And peak demand shifting, where you use control systems to shift load away from the peak times entirely, not just briefly. For the first compliance period, that's just 22-23, we'll focus on these simple ones, because they can be based on the existing energy savings scheme activities, the ones that help most with peak. And the first year will be things like efficient air conditioning, refrigerated cabinets, and so on, display cabinets. The details, however, are not out yet. They'll be in the rule, with the peak demand reduction scheme rule, which we'll be consulting on either late this year or early next. And then we'll add these other activities, peak demand response, peak shifting, over time. Just one example to work through. As an example, this is not a real example, of course, well, a real example in our scheme. It is a real example, but because the scheme doesn't exist yet, so we can't have a real example in our scheme. This is a metal recycling company that uses large energy-intensive machinery to shred car bodies and other scrap metal into pieces ready to be melted. Electricity is a large cost for them, 3rd largest cost, but they can be flexible about when they use electricity, because these particular machines aren't the only part of the process. So if they can generally choose when they operate them. This did participate in the ARENA trial that John mentioned, and was able to reduce demand by 3 megawatts during testing. If this were to join, instead of to join the peaks, our peak, the New South Wales peak scheme, a company like this could earn 180,000 peak certificates per year if they made that entire 3 megawatts available for the full 6 hours of the peak window, Monday to Sunday, so 7 days a week. If they could only do it for half the period, or less than 6 hours, or for less than 7 days a week, they'd get proportionally less certificates. Now, a word of caution on this example. This load was seeking to participate in the reliability and emergency reserve trader mechanism, and that is actually mutually exclusive with our scheme. So we'd have to choose one or the other, not do both. It could, however, be dispatched or activated by the new wholesale demand response mechanism, because that's a voluntary mechanism, and we will provide an incentive for the capacity, and then that mechanism will provide the activation payment. And that is, oh, sorry, one more thing. The details of the scheme are in the Energy Security Safeguard position paper, which is now on the Energy website. There's the link there in the note when you get the slides. If you're interested in activities, because we haven't consulted on those yet, it might be worth your while registering your interest on the Peak Demand Reduction Scheme homepage on the Energy website, and we'll make sure that you get the consultation paper on that. And if you're interested in the Business Decarbonisation Support Program, that's got a separate page on the Energy Saver website. Last but not least, if you've got any questions that aren't obviously answered by what's on those websites, we've got a dedicated mailbox, energy security at environment.nsw.gov.au, which will get to us and we can seek to answer your question. Thank you.
Keith, many thanks for that, Keith. A really good overview of what New South Wales government's doing there. I'll get you to stop sharing there. You'll see that we've got John Sibley from ARENA has been answering some questions in the background there. So if you've got some questions, still fire those through. And if you've got questions for Keith, put them through there, and Keith will hopefully be able to answer those as we move on to the next presentation. But Keith, yeah, I mean, some big numbers and good financial returns happening there, and we'll have that presentation sent out to everyone in case they need to refer to the material again. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Well, now we've heard what government's doing about it. Let's hear about what industry is doing in practice. We're going to hear now from Lisa Zembrodt and Bridgette Carter. Lisa's from Schneider Electric, and Bridgette Carter is from Bluescope Steel. If I just do a quick introduction for both, and then we can kick off. Lisa is the Director of Operations for Energy Markets of Schneider Electric. Very quickly, Lisa, plenty of years with in global research and analytics in the US headquarters, covering energy and carbon, so certainly understands this game. Bridgette Carter is the Manager for Energy Development within Bluescope, and I certainly find, Bridgette, all roads seem to be leading to yourself when it comes to climate and energy with Bluescope, so great to have you here and hear about the Bluescope story. Lisa, I'll hand over to you and to get the presentation started.
Great. Thank you, Darren, and to the A2EP for having me. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional custodians of the land that I'm dialing in from today. I'm going to talk to you today about taking a portfolio approach to energy strategies and how this can turn complexity into optimized outcomes. None of what I am providing today is advice on any financial products. Just make sure that that is. So, and I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't take this fantastic opportunity to share that Schneider Electric is a global specialist in energy management and automation, and also that we are rated as the most sustainable corporation in the world. I sit in the energy and sustainability services business, which is dedicated to helping large energy users and small energy producers manage their energy. And this would range from climate change consulting services to turnkey energy efficiency projects, to invoice validation and payment services. So it really runs the gamut. We are managing about 30 billion in annual energy spend across more than 250,000 sites around the world. So when we talk about sustainability and energy strategies, it's not only have we guided our thousands of clients around the world to better outcomes and reduced impacts, but we've also done it and continue to do it for ourselves as well. So certainly a passionate group of people if you get the opportunity to chat with us. So just to set the scene a bit, companies are making commitments that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and this is particularly impactful on energy portfolios. So companies are putting Solar on the roofs to lower the energy bills, signing PPAs to achieve renewable electricity targets, load shifting, as we just heard about, engaging in automated demand response to either improve the commercial outcomes or create some revenue. We're seeing the retrofitting of sites to charge EVs. Companies are installing batteries and installing microgrids, and really what all these things are doing is making something that used to be really quite simple, right? So, I'll consume what I want, how much I want, and I'll pay the retailer the same rate regardless. And I'll sign a contract once every few years or so, and it's really not too much to think about there. But what's happening is the transition is turning this, what used to be quite simple, into something much more complex. But there is so much opportunity being left on the table, and that's really what I want to talk to you about. So I thought it might be useful to visualize how simple energy portfolios were, in ancient times. So you had some physical assets, you had your consumption, maybe some backup generation if you needed it. You likely bought on a flat price, and you probably did that through a retail electricity contract, and that contract determined how you monetized or not the assets that you had. And oftentimes, the only complexity you had was how many retail contracts you were dealing with. So fast forward now to today, and now you've got a slew of different things in your portfolio, right? You've got all the physical changes like on-site solar or batteries or DR, and you've got the financial assets like PPAs or other financial assets, depending on how fancy you've gotten. And you've also got more constraints or targets or liabilities, and those are usually related to climate change strategies, risk management strategies. I will note that you are still limited by your retail electricity contract in most cases and how you're able to monetize all these physical and financial assets in your portfolio. But as I mentioned before, in all of this complexity comes the opportunity to bring them together and do something a bit smarter. So what can you do to ensure success? So a couple of years ago, I shared at the Energy Efficiency Expo my 5 critical success factors for energy management in a dynamic landscape. And these are all still completely relevant, but given the time constraints, we'll just focus on these 2, thinking holistically and starting with strategy. So first, in due diligence, you need to assess your corporate risk tolerance. And of course, that's best done by experts like us, of course. But it's really an important step. So in Schneider, in our approach, we garner input from varied stakeholders across the customer's business. Because ultimately what we want to find out is what does the CFO see as acceptable risk versus what does the CEO see as acceptable risk versus the plant operations manager or the sustainability leader. And these can be entirely different. I've done probably a few hundred of these over the last 15 years or so, and they can be very interesting. Some people will agree on the risk tolerance of the organization, but it's not entirely common to see that. But it is a crucial step because it helps to determine the suitability of products, and it leads to the consensus of the organizational goals. So nailing this down is really important if you want to have any success down the road of getting people to agree on a path forward. So now to what I would think of as the really exciting part, some of the numbers. So there really are infinite ways to build an energy portfolio, but what's the optimal approach to combining all those physical and financial assets and the right complementary retail contract structure that will enable the right level of risk and monetization of your assets and actions? You really need to do some granular work to find the right answers. So we use what we call our portfolio scenario analysis tool to test the strategies and essentially stack them up next to each other and determine which is the best suited, which is the optimal for any specific customer's requirements. Just a note, keep in mind that the graphic here is not representative of real outcomes. So please don't think it's going to give you the right answer. Please don't go away and make decisions. You might be led down the wrong path. But our tool combines our half-hourly spot price forecasts with the asset generation from all those varying assets and the load simulations from all the different sites. And it quantifies the range of potential outcomes under each strategy or each portfolio. And it allows us, therefore, to value different assets as well, right? So what's the value of my DR on a spot exposed contract versus a retail supply contract? How do I know if the third-party aggregator is giving me a good deal? What does a battery do or bring to my portfolio? What's the value of solar on my roof? And what do all of these things do to my cash flows? So the questions that this approach can answer is really limitless. And it's led to some really impressive outcomes for our clients. So this case in point, so this client came to us with a portfolio that needed to be optimized. So to date, it had been quite siloed, which is quite common, but they were quite switched on and realized that the market has evolved immensely in the last couple of years and that there might be a better approach. So we, as I said before, we assess their risk tolerance. We use the portfolio scenario analysis tool. We educated the stakeholders on the available approaches and the numbers behind each of those outcomes or the potential outcomes of each. And we recommended a change in their retail contract strategy, as well as, of course, we recommended to take that more holistic approach to their energy portfolio. And this included demonstrating the value that DR could bring to their portfolio. And we did all of this ensuring that they would reach their renewable electricity goals in a very cost-effective way. So this case study is really underlining the value that thinking holistically about your energy portfolio can bring. In fact, we identified nearly $270 million in potential savings, depending on the level of risk that they want to take on. So it really shows how bringing together the individual pieces of a portfolio can really demonstrate how they affect each other, making sure that you understand and optimize the gaps and overlaps that exist. Right, so to demonstrate this further, I will hand it over to Bridgette for a customer story and to share her insights from spearheading the great work that Bluescope has done as an industry leader in this space.
Thanks, Lisa. I'll just share my screen if I can. Okay. So I think, just to sort of give a bit of a background as to who
Bridgette, that one hasn't come up there. Just sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I can bring that up if necessary as well.
I'm a bit of a, I've got it now, I think.
Yep, that's on its way. And just go
Yeah,
to
okay.
presentation mode and we're in business.
Yeah, sorry, a bit of a Zoom novice. Yeah, so.
Oh, that's still in there, not in the presentation mode there. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah,
So Bluescope Steel, who are we? We're the largest steel maker in Australia, with around about 6,000 employees spread over about 100 facilities in Australia. As a, somebody who consumes about 1,200 gigawatt hours of electricity and 4 PJs of gas per annum, we are a significant energy user. And so, energy management is one of the keys to our competitiveness in a global market. So when we sort of approach energy management, we really look at all aspects of energy management. And I think you really need to do this to, drive improvements in your cost base and also drive improvements in your processes and get the right outcome. With respect to energy sourcing, you really need to have the right, I suppose, levers and the right sort of signals to drive those improvements, unlock the value within your load, and also optimize your costs. So sort of focusing then and sort of building more on, you know, what Lisa's already said, back in the dark ages, or the ancient times, as Lisa called it, we did have what was probably what you would deem a vanilla style arrangement for our energy sourcing. But we saw that the changes in the energy markets were they were signalling for us that we needed to assess what was a long-standing energy sourcing strategy to make sure that it was fit for purpose. So the review of that sort of energy strategy actually led us to overhaul the strategy and embrace a portfolio-based strategy, using strategy too many times, that sort of built a base. It was built from a base that we worked out at the inception of the strategy development around our risk profile and key business drivers. So the implementation of that sort of comprehensive portfolio based strategy allowed us to actually unlock what value we had in the way we use energy, so unlocking demand response. We also identified exactly what services we wanted and what we didn't based on what our risk profile was, so we were able to reduce our costs in that way. It also provided us flexibility so that we were able to move with the market and take advantage as the market shifted. And because we'd been through that sort of comprehensive and all sort of consuming strategy development, we actually ended up with something that was very tailored to our needs rather than a standard type arrangement. So how did we actually move a business that had a long-standing way of purchasing electricity to a new strategy that embraced the opportunities of the transforming market? And I think, you know, there's just so many different variables, options, mechanism, products. I mean, this is just a subset on this slide of what Lisa showed, but probably some things that are very common to people's thinking around what they can do to structure their electricity agreement. So I think the thing that I think about when I think about our journey as a business, and sort of we've only got a few minutes to touch on it, so I've sort of picked on the top things that I think made our sort of strategy journey a success. And it really all goes back to what Lisa was saying about knowing your risk profile. But it's not only just knowing your risk profile, but getting consensus and involving decision makers in that actual analysis is actually key to success and getting the business on board, because you do get that common understanding of how you view risk, energy market risk as a business, and you do get that upfront understanding of where you're moving as a business and what your common goals and drivers are. So I think, you know, I think apart from sort of having a trusted advisor by your side, they were the two sort of key elements in our journey that really stuck out to me, to be able to sort of move a business to a tailored and comprehensive sourcing strategy. One that now, you know, instead of having long-term arrangements in place, has a mix of all sorts of things. We've got demand response, we've got a solar PPA that we've just sleeved into our portfolio with an inverse solar shape. And we've got some spot exposure that has actually unlocked that demand response capability for us. So I think, just to sort of sum up, please involve your key decision-making people early. And yeah, definitely get consensus on risk and the upfront, so the drivers upfront with your organisation. And I think that really sets you in good stead to make changes across the business and take on opportunities in what is a very fast evolving market.
Fantastic. Bridgette and Lisa, thank you so much for that. It's, just to get those first few steps right on this journey, and you've described them so well of what needs to be done and how to do that. Fantastic to hear about that and how you can kick this off properly. There's no doubt going to be some questions coming through on the Q&A there, and feel free to answer those and type in some responses there. If we have time at the end, we'll of course have a little discussion over them as well. But Bridgette and Lisa, many thanks. Let's move on now to other companies working together to move forward in this space. And so I'd like to introduce you to Louise Walsh and Jeremy Sampson. Louise, I'll get you to share your presentation as I give you an introduction there. And Louise works for Ndevr Environmental. Ndevr is so strongly known when it comes to auditing and reporting. And Louise, you've worked a lot with the auditing and reporting under Enger's scheme, and also a really good understanding of the Emissions Reduction Fund and how to apply and how that will work. So great to have you here and talking this afternoon. I'll hand over to you in just a moment, but just to also say that she's joined by Jeremy Sampson from the Crown Resorts Group. Jeremy is an engineer who works with infrastructure and capital works for Crown. Crown has some 19 million visitors per year, so quite some, and no doubt demanding visitors as well. And so Jeremy's got quite a juggling act there to try and get this, make sure all those stakeholders are happy with any demand response or load flexing activities that he does. So let's hear from Louise and Jeremy on their journey in this energy procurement and load flexing. Over to you.
Thanks, Jared. Just confirming you can see my presentation.
That's come up and we can hear you well.
Well, thanks for having me on the panel. And firstly, I'd just also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and every day, which for me today is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As Jared said, I work at Ndevr Environmental. Ndevr Environmental is a specialist energy and carbon consulting company. We work with a range of energy consumers, both small and large, but particularly the large consumers that report under the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme, as Jared mentioned. And today I just wanted to introduce a few concepts around load shifting before handing over to Jeremy to talk about his experiences at Crown and how they've taken advantage of a few opportunities at their facility. So firstly, just to set the scene, I wanted to highlight some of the importance of reducing overall peak demand on the grid as a whole. As many of us on this call would know, some of the increasing prices from over the past few years have been a result of some of the investment in the poles and wires. And for some energy consumers, this can be quite a significant charge on their energy bill, accounting for up to 50% of their energy costs. And so just what I wanted to highlight, first of all, is the significance and importance of individuals and also some of the large energy consumers across the grid playing their role in managing those costs and contributing to managing energy costs for all energy consumers. So to reduce that overall peak demand, there's a number of different ways energy consumers can manage that peak demand. Firstly, as Keith mentioned earlier, energy efficiency is one way. It reduces the overall demand curve, but also this can be complemented by demand response measures that will shrink that demand curve even further. So I've just sort of summarised 3 different ways that we've found some of our clients are adopting to measures that our clients are adopting to reduce their peak demand. And I've just categorised them into a few different areas. So firstly, self-generation and storage, which includes batteries, but also tri-generation and cogeneration technologies, which Jeremy will talk to you more about his experiences at Crown and how they've taken advantage of those technologies at their facility. With one of our other clients, they found the use of Trigen particularly beneficial for their site, which has quite a high penetration of solar. So they've been able to use their tri-generation unit to manage that increasing demand of the site as the solar generation decreases later in the day. And so that has helped them manage their peak demand costs. But also some of our other clients have found that they've been able to use, one of the clients, sorry, I should say, they've been able to use a particular financing model to install a cogeneration unit on their site. And so what that involved is a third party owning and operating the cogeneration unit and charging the site at a lower cost than what they would pay for electricity from a retailer. Secondly, I've just touched on demand response and load shedding as a potential measure, and I'll talk to a particular case study on the next slide. But what I wanted to highlight here is the key consideration we found with our clients participating in demand response is that cost benefit consideration and analysis to make sure that what revenue that they're receiving from potential demand response measures is worth shedding their load during that particular time. And lastly, load shifting is probably one of the more common measures that we have seen across the board. One thing that we've found is that this load shifting is an option for consumers, energy consumers of all sizes. So this is something that most recently we found quite a number of, we've been doing some work with some farmers across New South Wales and Victoria, and what we've been able to identify as a potential opportunity for them is to be able to shift some of their consumption to increase their generation from, increase their self-consumption of their electricity generated from solar. What we found in those cases is that to be able to identify that, understanding their load profile really unlocks those opportunities and identifies where the opportunities are for those sites. And so just briefly to touch on a case study before I hand over to Jeremy to talk to his experiences. We had one client who participated in the ARENA and AEMO trial of demand response trial a number of years ago. And just to help set the context, it was shortly after the blackouts in South Australia. So there was a real need to, it was a real, I guess, understanding from the broader community that there was a need to help manage those peak demand times during the day. And so what this particular client of ours was able to do, they had 2 industrial facilities in Victoria and New South Wales that were able to offer 3 megawatts and 3 response trial. They received funding both for participating and just being on standby to shed that load as part of the trial, with additional funding and revenue received for actually reducing their load should they have been called upon. The process there that they undertook with a third-party aggregator was to design their energy reduction plan up front to understand where the potential was to reduce their energy without having too much of an impact on their day-to-day operations. And that was facilitated by metering technology that was supplied and installed by the third-party aggregator. But what I really wanted to highlight here is that sustainability story really helped build the business case internally for that particular corporation. And they were really proud to be able to demonstrate that their commitment to becoming a leader in sustainability by participating in that trial, as well as their commitment to the community and the environment as part of participating in the trial by managing that peak demand through participating in demand response trial. And so with that, I'll hand over to Jeremy to provide an update and some information on his experience at Crown.
Thanks, Louise. Stop sharing your screen. I will switch to mine. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jeremy Sampson at Crown Melbourne. I'm an electrical engineer and I manage infrastructure and capital works here at Crown. Now, you may have visited Crown in the past. It's a large integrated resort on the south bank of the Yarra River in Melbourne. And in addition to the casino, we've got on site 3 hotel towers with 1,600 rooms, a large banquet and convention facility, over 50 restaurants and bars in the building, and all of the complex is spread across about 500,000 square meters. So unfortunately, we're completely closed at the moment, and we have been for some time. But when we are operating at full capacity, we can welcome up to 20 million guests per year through the doors, and we can typically peak at about 16 megawatts of electricity just on the main building. Our thermal air conditioning capacity is about 45 megawatts thermally, and to facilitate all that, we need to make sure we've got appropriate backup. So I guess on the slide here, just showing our backup generators, which also have performed the function of a tri-generation system. And a lot of people have had good or bad experiences with cogen or trigen over the years. I think we were lucky to have had a really good experience during the first 17 years of our buildings operation and of the trigen operation. And that comes down to a few factors. We've got good, consistent heating and cooling loads to use all of the waste heat that come off of the trigen system. And I think during the 2000s and the 2010s, the price of electricity and gas were very appropriate for running cogen and trigen. So it was quite successful. We hit 70,000 hours of operating hours on these units. So they reached their end of life, and we've just recently replaced all of them to make sure that we continue with good, reliable backup power. So we've got 6 megawatts that supports the main building across 6 Caterpillar generators, and then also for our Metropole Hotel, we have a smaller cogen system that still operates. It provides power to the car park and heating hot water and domestic hot water to the hotel, which is the second largest hotel in Australia. So I guess I've talked about a couple of the ways that we use these generators, but over the last couple of years, we've played around with using them in different ways. So over the next few slides, I'm just going to go through those 3 different scenarios. One of those is just using them for wholesale demand response. We've participated with aggregators on demand response for several years, and this is just a slide showing roughly the profile of our building during a peak day. And on this day, it was a day when we were actually called for a demand response event. So we turned on our generators at about 3 p.m., put out about 5 megawatts until 9 p.m. and we're able to provide to satisfy our demand response contractual requirements and also reduce our impact on the grid on a heavy peak day. So we've participated in demand response a few years. A few years have better cost benefits than others, and we intend on participating this year as well. Another way we've used our generators, one of the years the demand response, the payback wasn't quite there, so we programmed our SCADA and control systems just to manage our peak demand charges. So as you can see in the red lines, we would normally hit close to 16 megawatts during the summer. This was in December, and we program up our SCADA just to start up one generator at a time, just to control that peak to 13 megawatts. We ran that scenario for 1 year, and yes, we did cut our demand charges by nearly 3 megawatts that year. But we did find that we put a lot of hours on the generators. So going forward, we're looking more toward demand response rather than peak lopping. And also, while it does help us on our demand charges, the days that we're operating doesn't really help the greater good of pulling off our demand on those absolute peak days. Then the third way we've used our generators, as I mentioned, we're completely closed currently due to COVID, and we have been closed periodically over the last year and a half. And like many people, that exposed us to our take or pay agreements with natural gas. And so we ran the numbers, and we saw that for really a net zero cost, we could switch about 2.5 megawatts of our electrical load over to generators running natural gas. We didn't see any cost impact from operational costs, but we were able to accommodate our minimum annual quantities with our natural gas supplier. And so that was an extremely useful scenario that we could use this year, and hopefully we never have to use it again, but it came in extremely handy. So yeah, look, just quickly, those were three real life examples of how we've used our assets to reduce our demand and shift our loads from electricity to natural gas. And I guess just a couple key points here is, people often think that our generators are diesel. A lot of buildings' generators are diesel, and that would be extremely expensive to operate. Ours are natural gas. Depending on the natural gas pricing, it is very viable to operate even without heat recovery, and we can run indefinitely. So just from a backup point of view, we have better long-term electrical backup, and it keeps our insurers happy that we're not storing diesel on site. The synchronous operation of our generators means we can turn them on and off whenever we want without impacting the building, because our customer experience is a key deliverable for Crown, and we can't just handle brief power outages when we're turning on the generators for testing or whatever we need them for. So yeah, we're able to turn on our generators anytime without any impact to the operation of the building. And then electrical and natural gas rates. For many years it was quite stable, and it was a very consistent way to save both money and greenhouse gases. But more recently, it's with the volatility, we're looking at our options in the future, and one of those options may be just to operate trigeneration during the peak months of January, February, March, when our electricity rates are high, and hopefully our gas rates are lower. And finally, there's a massive reduction of greenhouse gas savings when we do run our trigen system. So going forward, that will be one of the first tools that we have in our basket to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So that's it for me. I I'm happy to answer any questions in the on the comments slide. Otherwise, I'll hand back to you, Jared.
Jeremy, many thanks. And yeah, there's a question there for you already about the impact the carbon emissions having those the gas generators there, and I guess yeah, you no doubt be considering sometime in the future of other methods, non-fossil fuel methods for your load flexing and load shifting there, no doubt. And may well be the likes of some thermal batteries and incorporation of those, I guess, Jeremy.
Yes, yeah, that's a key point. Yeah, we do want to look into that.
Very good. So yeah, there's a nice bit of interactive chat happening in the chat box there. So feel free to have a look through that and put some responses in there. Yeah, some good comments there about what do we do with peak prices and what have you, and getting the right signals. So yeah, go for some chat in there. That's great. Very good. We're now going to move on to technologies to help us with load shifting. And Dave Taylor, you're going to join me now for a real quick update on a project that you and I are working on. It's a project for the Race for 2030 CRC. Dave, if you'd like to come off mute and start with sharing a presentation there. I'll give you a quick introduction for yourself. Dave Taylor is the Senior Engineer and Director at DETA Consulting. DETA is an energy consultant, very strong history in with working with industrial customers and meatworks and milking and dairy systems. And Dave, you've been working with in the energy space for many years, and it's been a pleasure working with you on this project, which we're about halfway through with. Dave, you there?
Perfect. Yes, cool. No, thanks a lot, Jared. Yes, I guess the project we're looking at is refrigeration load flex in abattoirs specifically. So I guess there's been a lot of work done in cold stores, but not so much in abattoirs specifically. So this project was really designed to look at the technical feasibility and the amount of the load flex that we could do. So I guess it's a bit of a collaboration, so with A2EP, but also AMPC, UTS, Glacium, AGL and us. It's really set up, designed to get, I guess, input from these different people, different organisations, to cover off the pricing and the technologies and all those kind of things, really with an aim to, rather than keeping it too specific on particular sites for the load flex, more to be able to roll it out around the country to see really what can be done. There's a few specific things we're looking at. Ideally, there's low-cost solutions, and that's really around optimising the controls and operational parameters to move the loads around, such things as set points and fan speeds and suction pressures and those kind of things, really modifying them to take the load off in those high pricing periods and move it to low pricing periods where possible. Also looking at some higher cost solutions. And that pretty much comes down to an installation of equipment. So storage, so that's a key one that we're looking at as well. Both ice banks and those kind of things, but also the phase change. And we'll be quite interesting as we're looking at, I guess, a range of different loads, both lowish temperature, as in glycol at 0 degrees kind of thing, all the way down to minus 35. So there's quite a range of things that we're looking at in there. We're also looking at high temperature heat pumps, so not specifically a load shed system for this project at the moment, but I guess with them in there, it does increase the options for, I guess, those carbon reductions, but also increasing and decreasing loads as and when able down to those prices. It's process to date, so it was quite a process to actually get some good indicative sites. So I had a look at 2, and really looking at, I guess, one site, 1 shift versus 2 shifts. Sites with solar, sites without, rendering, no rendering, and the chilled versus frozen mix. Because the abattoirs, I guess, they have both the chilled and the hard frozen, and also the location as well. So through those things, we're really after the aim of getting some pretty indicative sites that then we could roll out. I've undertaken some good contractor discussions as well. So the refrigeration contractors have been very valuable, both in giving us information around their sites, around what's there and what we can do, but also their thoughts on the system as well. Undertaken some site visits. Unfortunately, COVID's made it a bit hard to actually get to the sites. So we've done one remotely, and still hopeful of getting to another one shortly, which will be good. looking at different technologies as well. So looking at different things, particularly around, I guess, the price forecasting and those kind of things, to make the most of any assets that we put in there. Want to be using them all the time for that daily load shifting and filling and filling them up and charging them up and discharging as well. But then we also want to actually have enough capacity to really step off the load when we can to particular price signals. And as you expect, there's a lot of data collection going on as well. So lots of specific refrigeration and processing information that we need to actually, make sure that there's a good indication of the options around. Next steps, modelling. Working with UTS to do some modelling. I guess the kind of the aim is to be running lots and lots and lots of different scenarios, really to see which is best and see how that can be put in, both around that day-to-day operation and then saving the capacity for those high peak times as well. Part of the reporting, one of the key things that will be around that technical feasibility. In theory, there's lots of things that can be done, which is great, but then also it comes into the economics as well. So while things are technically feasible, that doesn't actually always mean that they can, the bank balance can handle it. We're also particularly interested in replicability. Basically we want to be able to roll it out to, to other meat processors around the country as well, really to see. And I guess one point around the economics as well is looking at, I guess, the pricing which the organisations see, but also the ones they don't see as well, both the wholesale market and other pricing which might come out in the future, and also if that can, then that'll help really drive that market. Finishing off, reporting back and industry feedback. So one of the key things with this is actually getting feedback from, I guess, end users, from the group that we're dealing with, but other industries as well and other contractors, really to make sure that everyone's on the same page and and kind of can have some thoughts into what we're presenting. And with that in mind as well, so if there's anyone on the call which does have industrial refrigeration on site, and you'd like to be in an end user group to really, to look at some of the options and the discussions, then please get in touch with Jared or myself.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And the point's well made that it's not just about applying this for abattoirs. This should go across the dairy industry, mine sites, all those places where there's a lot of large industrial refrigeration, wineries of course as well. So yeah, we're looking for this to be applicable right across. And when I now reflect on the presentations there from earlier there, Dave, you could see how this may well feed into this risk profiles that companies have. If we have this the modelling outputs will certainly give a lot more confidence on that risk profile and how that fits in well. So Dave, we'll be finishing up early next year with this one and look forward to sharing results as they come available. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. That sounds good.
Good one. Dave, many thanks, and appreciate the getting us back on time as well.
No worries.
And we did mention in that presentation Glacium, and Glacium has got a presentation for us now looking at these PCMs, or phase change materials. And we were looking at applying that for the abattoir project, but that's being used for many other applications, and there's research being done on that right now. So it's a pleasure to introduce Hessam Samsarella, the Senior Research Engineer from Glacium, and he's joined by Raymond Little, a Research Engineer from the University of South Australia, who are working together to progress this and do the modelling on how this can be, these PCMs can be used with HVAC and refrigeration. Hessam, hand that over to you, and look forward to hearing about this technology and what you guys are up to.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Hessam. I've worked with University of South Australia and Glacium Cooling Technologies within a very dynamic team. Our main role here is to close the gap between research and real-life application. So today I'll be introducing a technology, PCM energy storage, which is also known as ice banks or thermal energy storage. and compare it with electric batteries to see how it can contribute to load flexing and the economics of it for customers. So let's see how PCM batteries and electrochemical batteries compare. PCM energy storage system is meaningful where there is a cooling application involved. Examples could be in a winery or abattoir, in food and beverage production in general, cold storage, building air conditioning, and supermarket. These are all examples. And to see the significance of it, it's good to know that according to cold hard facts, more than 23% of Australia's energy consumption goes to cooling processes. So PCM energy storage systems are 2 to 3 times less expensive than electric batteries. Their lifespan is longer, more than 20 years, and they are recyclable. So all of the material used in manufacturing them can be recycled, and they're far less, they have far less environmental inverse impact. And their footprint is less than electric batteries. The way thermal energy storage or PCM energy storage can interact with power network is exactly like electric batteries. So we can do everything that an electric battery can do. For instance, peak demand reduction by storing energy when there is not a peak demand, so off-peak periods, and releasing it during peak periods. Load shedding, so whenever network requires you to cut down your power consumption, again, possible with a PCM energy storage. Load shifting, which is actually possible to generate income for the end users through load shifting. For instance, arbitrage. If you're in the spot market and getting electricity in large scale, you can make money with your negative prices, consume all that energy with your refrigeration plant and store it. And then during your peak events, you can make money by not using energy as much as you have to, and also by probably even exporting. Load shaping is also possible, and frequency management is just by stopping exporting to the network, you are alleviating the pressure of non-synchronous generation, and that helps for frequency stability of the network. What is PCM storage in practice? Just quickly to see how it works. So the charge process involves pumping the chilled glycol into a coil that is submerged in the PCM. Let's take water. And the chilling effect is going to create ice on the coil. So after the charge process, we will be left with a full block of ice. That's when we're consuming the energy and storing it. And the discharge is actually turning off your refrigeration plant, just run the glycol with a pump. So we were talking about 20 to 30 times less energy consumption during discharge, which will actually melt the ice from inside out and meet your cooling demand without consuming much energy. This might come across as a technology that can be used for chilled water application, but within the research, we have developed PCMs that can freeze and melt at -6 and up to -28 degrees, actually down to -28 degrees, which enables, the application of thermal storage in all temperature ranges: high temperature, medium temperature, and low temperature. Let's see how customers can benefit from this type of battery. So as I mentioned earlier, we can generate income if you're trading energy in a large scale by consuming more energy during low or negative price events, and by exporting or consuming less energy during high price events. We can cut the peak demand by the same sort of scenario and make money. If we have on-site assets such as solar, long when exporting will be actually costly. What we will enable here is to store that excess solar and deal with the duck curve later in the day. Maximize benefit of PPAs. Again, it's a type of load flexing, and there is economical advantage for consumers. But here are some very interesting applications of thermal energy storage. Imagine in climates like South Australia or Victoria, where we have very few really hot days. What happens is you will most often be forced to oversize your refrigeration plant to meet just with those few hours of heat waves. And what thermal storage can bring about is it'll be a supplementary cooling, and in those events it can actually supplement your cooling capacity and make sure that you're not running with less capacity than required. So we're talking about putting the capex on your refrigeration plant. And another interesting application of thermal energy storage or PCM energy storage is in conjunction with heat pumps. So industry is being incentivized to electrify gas and electrify heating and replace gas. And that is possible through use of heat pumps. What we can see here is an actual load profile for a commercial building, actually a cinema in South Australia, interestingly in a summer day. So we can see that there is heat load early in the morning, close to midday, and then the rest of the day there is demand for cooling load. What happens is if we find a device, PCM storage, to offset the cooling that will be normally generated will be released to outside air, and utilize it throughout the day for cooling, that is actually maximizing the efficiency of the heat pump. We get to the recent developments and breakthroughs that the team has had. Distributed energy resources, as mentioned earlier in this webinar, is they will require an energy management system. You can see a snapshot of the smart control system developed by Glacium Cooling Technologies and UniSA, which is looking at a few components. So energy price being downloaded from NEM, from EMO. We have the current load of the system, so that is the cooling loads. And we also have the weather forecast. The controller will take all this information and decide the best flow of energy. So what's the best action to take place? Is it to go full on charge? Is it to discharge, maintain half of your charge and continue meeting the load? These are all the outcomes of this smart device with a histogram of the events that has been occurring being shown to customer real time. The other development is we're improving the efficiency of these systems. So integrating thermal energy storage with refrigeration systems will require a secondary refrigerant, normally a glycol loop. By replacing this loop with the primary refrigerant, which is CO2, as a volatile refrigerant, we are actually enabling more charging rates, so higher charging rate within the same infrastructure. We are enabling lower discharge power consumption, which that means we're doing even better in cutting the peak demand or making more income actually during the high price events. But most importantly, this technology will enable us to deploy PCM energy storage across the parts of industry that have moved on from using glycols. For instance, look at supermarkets. Supermarkets are not likely to go back to using glycol evaporators in the display cases or in the cool rooms. As opposed to that, pumped refrigeration or pumped CO2 systems are becoming very popular in supermarket applications because they're simply more efficient. And this is an opportunity for us to be able to tie PCM energy storage in this sector. It's good to know that more than 50% of energy consumption in the supermarket actually goes to cooling and air conditioning. Finally, we're actually prototyping this recent development in UniSA. We're integrating and manufacturing large-scale heat pumps for district cooling and heating. We really look forward to contributions from industry to actually collaborate with us in assessing the viability of implementing PCM storage in their industries. So find more applications for this technology and also maybe invest in commercializing this technology. I'll be glad to answer your questions, and please feel free to email your questions if it's beyond the time of this webinar.
So many thanks for that presentation. The opportunities and the applications for this are going to be a long list. So we really look forward to following this technology and the rollout and seeing where the successes are and the lessons learned and how those new controls really work. I'm sure that's going to be a hell of an enabler to make this a success. Hessam, many thanks. And yeah, in this final minute, we are over time, but there might be the odd question, but if not, feel free to email through to Hessam. So with that, we'll close for the session for today. I'd like to thank our speakers that joined us today. That was, we had Louise and Bridgette, Lisa, Hessam, Jeremy, Dave, John, Keith, Raymond, all joining us for fantastic presentations today. Many thanks. This is, as I said, this is the first of two in the series that we are doing. Next week, next Wednesday, just 1 hour later at 3:30 Australian Eastern Summer Time, we'll be doing a presentation on facility integration and more on thermal batteries. We'll look at just a simple chilled water thermal battery and how that's been implemented at the Sunshine Coast University. And we're also going to look at very high temperature thermal batteries getting up to around 600 degrees as well. And also a very unique technology from Azelio, which is combining a liquid aluminium battery to provide electricity and thermal heat source as well. So look forward to taking you through that next week. After that, later then for next month, we'll be doing presentations on process heating alternatives, covering things like biogas, biomass, hydrogen, high temperature solar thermal, as well as gasification. And then after that, we'll have a presentation on the 10th of November talking about high temperature, ultra high temperature heat pumps. What we're getting the very latest from one of the international gurus, Dr. Corden Apagus, who is working on steam heat pumps. And so we'll find out about that on Wednesday, the 10th of November. So very much thanks again to our speakers. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Apologies for being a few minutes over time, but I hope you found it worthwhile. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you all.